This is a Channel F production. You're listening to Channel F. That was a new track by Psychic Weapons, All on Fire, and the accompanying video done in collaboration with a very talented filmmaker by the name of Jesse Yules. Jesse has a talent for creating abstract and highly creative worlds. His unique filmmaking vision is sought after by musicians looking for videos that set them apart from the usual fare. Today I'll be in conversation with this very unique and interesting director about his process, his influences, and why the direction of his filmmaking and art will be strictly determined from here on in by Jesse Yules. I reached Jesse at his home in Toronto. All right, I'm joined by Jesse Yules on this episode, and it's a real pleasure to have you, Jesse. How are you today?
Oh, wonderful. It's a sunny day in Roncesvalles.
Yeah, it's a sunny day for it, a little bit cool, though. What inspired you to become a filmmaker? What were your inspirations and what drove you into it in the first place?
Well, I think like a lot of kids that were born in the 80s and 90s, we were kind of raised by television.
Yeah.
And I think it must have rewired our brains or something, because all the time I was growing up, our friends, the inside jokes would inevitably be quoting movies and television shows. The jokes would all come from like, teasing each other about your bands and music and stuff that you liked.
Yeah.
When I had romantic experiences, there was always like a piece of media that would help me feel nostalgic or help me like, trigger those romantic vibes. A song would be associated with a person or like a scene from a movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't think that I had any choice. Like by the time I got to be an adult, just being somehow involved in manipulating media was just the only way I could think.
Yeah.
I need to express myself that way. I need to be able to tinker with that kind of stuff, or I'm just not fulfilled. I'm not happy.
And I was going to say, it's almost as if we see that way, because I'm from the TV generation, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy for you in a way to sort of get into it because you understand the pacing and the sort of visual narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I have noticed that with a lot of people are already familiar with it, even if they're not, high school or they're getting into Sheridan or something like that. They already have a sort of knowledge of what they want and what aesthetically is pleasing in some ways.
Yeah, they have the literacy comes very, very early.
Yeah.
And you see it in little kids that have had a lot of screen time, like kindergartners.
Yeah.
They'll kind of explain things in a narrative way that would only come from like watching a lot of movies.
Were there any early influences? What were they? Do any really stand out apart from your sort of the association with memories and that kind of thing?
Let's see. Well, I think that around the time that I was in college, it was the golden age of music videos.
Yeah.
And what was extraordinary about that time is you had people like Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry.
Yeah.
And even before I knew the names of the directors, those videos that they were creating just jumped off the screen, like everyone was different. They used a different approach, a different aesthetic, a different mood.
Yeah.
And that really appealed to me because I guess my form of like ADHD is that I get very bored with styles and things that people and artists that I'm a fan of. I want to see somebody exploring and trying new things all the time,
Right.
Even at the risk of like not having the same quality or like having mistakes.
Yeah.
I think it's very exciting when artists like try to step outside the bounds and change the medium. And so music videos, that was what was rewarded at that time, is that if you made something different than before, if you made something that was unconventional, it was really celebrated.
Right.
And I immediately started thinking of that as kind of like a dream job, especially
Yeah.
when you're coming out of school and you're thinking about like, oh, are you interested in film? Do you want to take another 4 years and go to film school? I was like, I don't know. I think that like just starting to make music videos would be the easiest way to like pick up the skills over time, right? Because you could just learn on your feet. And it seems like the easiest thing for a young filmmaker too at that time was to make a music video, because you already have a built-in audience, you know? Like as soon as you pair your visuals to a band that's already been out working hard and gaining fans, at least you're going to have a few hundred or a few thousand people that will see the thing, right? Like so many young filmmakers that come out of art school, they're just in a vacuum, right? Like it's just your friends that are watching your stuff.
Yeah. This would happen in the late 80s to the 90s. Is that sort of the period you're talking about?
Yeah, and into the 2000s too.
Yeah.
I think that once the internet came along, there was a boom and bust.
Yeah.
There was a boom where suddenly you had these gates open and all of the artists could get together online and trade around a lot of cool stuff.
Right.
And then once kind of like the non-artists and the non-nerds showed up on the internet, then everything started to get like a lot noisier, and finding the cool stuff became hard again. Became more like cable TV.
Yeah. And going back to your point on artists being creative, I mean, that's the whole process. Is you try not to stay formulaic unless, you know, there's a commercial aspect to what you're doing. But as an artist, you have to keep growing, and your last project is sort of tucked away somewhere because you've done that. You want to get on to the next one. And I always found that very exciting. It's just one of those things. It's not many people can accept that, unfortunately, and if there's money involved. But you seem to have overcome that in some way. People are really coming to you for your style.
Oh, well, I hope so. I think that as the internet and YouTube and stuff becomes more busy and more noisy, having work that is like distinctive and kind of something that you haven't seen before and becomes a higher and higher bar to reach.
Yeah.
But luckily, like it comes with practice. Like if you get into the habit of doing something different all the time, then those unique ideas come more easily to you.
Absolutely.
Because I think there's a discipline too with real fine artists that have a distinct style. That's a talent in itself, like to dig deeper and deeper into the onion and find all of like the minutia and the layers and stuff that haven't been explored in that particular world. I'm actually super envious of people who can think that way.
Yeah.
It's just not the way my brain is structured. Like I'm always chasing the shiny thing that I see on the horizon.
Yeah. Do you ever, is it a situation where you're kind of thinking, I want to do something like that? And you always, like if you see somebody else's work or you see something else and you think to yourself, I want to do something similar.
Oh, 100%. If you log on to Boom, the art blog Boom, you'll see so many amazing styles that are influential and inspiring.
Yeah.
To me, what ends up happening is I'll see something and I'll want to be influenced by that thing, but it's generally just the mood that ends up going into me, because I don't really have. It's difficult to copy somebody's style. Like even if you really focused on trying to copy line for line an image that you're looking at.
Yeah.
The translation of it going through your body and your eyes and your hands, and then trying to replicate that, it's always going to add a filter to it, like just your biomachinery trying to interpret that thing.
Yeah.
And then also there's an aspect of it where you and I can both look at the same piece of artwork.
Yeah.
And the things that you like about it and are responding to might be completely different than I respond to, right? Like I might be just seeing the composition. You might be seeing like a narrative that's happening in the picture that you're responding to. So the influences there are a little bit random.
One of the things and do you ever find yourself wanting to do something edgy, or are you not you're not directed by, or you're not informed by trends? How is it? Or is it a combination of both?
Well, I think over the last like 5 or 6 years, I haven't been trying to track trends. I have been surprised at like some of the styles and approaches that I used 10 years ago came back into fashion or had more legs than I had expected. There'd be a technique where I did, say you're talking about like Go Motion or something. You go like, well, we did that and it was a video and, that was 10 years ago. And then you still see it popping up over and over and over again. Or you'll do something with like paper cut stop motion animation, and you think that the world is going to move on, but like there's always a particular mood that stuff inspires that people never tire of for some reason.
It also speaks to this idea of you were talking about the conformity. Some people there's a conformity to how they see visual narratives, and then they come across something that is unique, and even if it's 10 or 20 years old, they respond to it, and it suddenly becomes a trend again. I think sometimes that's what it is.
Yeah. I remember our graphic design teacher at Sheridan, Jill Dallas.
Yeah.
She was talking about trends as a working designer, and how like you get into this evolutionary curve where you look at the bookshelf and you see, okay, everyone is using giant, bold sans serif type. I'm going to release my book with teeny tiny serif type, and it'll stand out among the crowd. And you just, over, decades, that happens again and again, where suddenly everybody copies and the type gets small. So you come back and flip the script again. And I think that you can do the same thing. The same things happen with filmmaking too, I think.
Your work is highly creative and it's really full of depth. What's your aim in terms of how you go about achieving your final vision? Do you have a process? One of the things I notice is that it seems to me like you're really trying to get some kind of transparency to and depth to your imagery. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the best way to summarize the last 4 years would be a return to focus on craft. I've been taking my regular approach and then re-examining, okay, how do we get better exposure on this camera? What kind of investments can we make in lighting and things like rigging and stuff to make sure the craft is elevated a little bit? I am pretty much working the same way I always have, where I kind of have a studio that's full of bits and bobs and junk, and I go to the print shop often, and I'll do some Photoshop and then print off some cards of photographs that I want to collage with or manipulate. And really, what's changed over the last 3 or 4 years is just investing in the equipment to be able to photograph that stuff at a higher level.
Yeah.
Because I think that allows me to have the best of both worlds, where I can both have my indie roots where I can have my play space and just work casually, but I can also more confidently go to higher end clients and stuff and say, like, this is a good investment of your money. Like, this is a nicely photographed thing. And I also feel like it shows a little bit of an evolution, like for my artwork too, to like see the quality increase.
So your production values are become quite important to you over the last couple of years.
The once I had like a proper like professional DSLR, and I started looking at the 5K raw images that were coming off of that, you can't forget that, right? Like being able to see like all the little eyelashes and stuff on each of the people you're photographing. And then also like the dynamic range adds that kind of like 3D quality that I think you were describing.
Yeah.
The transparency of it. I think that's something that's kind of new that's been entering into my work, is like as the production values are going up, the images seem a little bit more deep. They seem a little bit less flat. Yeah. And so I'm happy with that.
Is it very technical in terms of putting it together? Does it take a lot of work? I mean, again, because your work is very abstract and it has a very definite style, but is it very difficult to put together technically?
I would say it's hard to gauge that because I don't outsource my work. Everything that I make is made by me. Yeah. So unless I had like an apprentice or something, I wouldn't be able to know like how easy things would come to somebody else. The approach has evolved gradually, and because of that, I'm a little bit blind to what is hard about it, because I just do it every day. Yeah. I also am aware that like I might have a way of working that's awkward that I just don't know is awkward. Right. There might be easier ways to do things than I'm aware of. Yeah. I do try to keep up on watching tutorials and things to see better approaches, but often I'll try the other approach and the aesthetic is different. It's not the same. Like when you try to find the digital shortcut for something that you've been doing analog, you can see it in the images. It's like they look a little bit more plastic or something.
You talk about music videos, but you've also done things like web series and I guess what people would call, a bit more of a commercial approach to what you're doing. Is there a big difference between the real creative work that you do for, say, for instance, music videos, as opposed to things like a web series or other projects? Or are those your bread and butter, as it were?
Well, initially, when I was coming out of art school, music videos were an alternative to going to film school.
Yeah.
I thought that that was the best way of learning the mechanics of film in order to become a narrative filmmaker eventually.
Right.
And so that was always, my eye was on that prize. And so I went through the trouble of like saving up a whole bunch of money and buying the gear that I needed to make a narrative film.
Right.
And went through the process of it. And it was just not a fun was not a fun experience. I started to realize that like I don't like being on set.
Yep.
I don't like craft services. I don't like the early starts. I don't like the drama of working with actors and things like that. The web series that I made, I'm proud of, and it was a lot of like blood and sweat, but I didn't like the kind of personality it brought out in me. Like I was just stressed and angry, and it was a hell of a lot of work. And then the other thing about it was the immediacy was removed from it, right? Like when it comes to doing a long-term narrative with a tiny team, I was working on that web series for like 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I only shot it for like 6 days or something in 2016.
Right.
But the actual like work of getting the glitches out of the wireless audio and editing the thing and the color grading. Oh, it was a very, very challenging. It was the hardest thing I ever did.
Yeah.
And I felt like once I released it and it kind of like, you know, even my fans were just kind of like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it didn't have the impact that I thought it would. Like I thought that I had it in my head that real filmmakers, you go through music videos to learn your trade, then you're going to graduate to the big leagues of making real movies,
features and stuff.
And what I found is that that's just me with my old fashioned thinking. That's just me coming from my upbringing that I expected that arc. The new millennials and things that are younger than me, they don't have any distinction in hierarchy when it comes to a game that they're playing or a podcaster that they really like or a YouTuber that they like. It's all on the same playing field. Everybody is competing for the same eyeballs, and you're just the only rule. The only like distinction in quality is like, does it move people?
It's the story.
They're not impressed by like the blisters on your fingers or how long you worked on something. It's like, is it moving? Like, is there emotion there? Like, and if you're choosing an approach that is taking the joy out of your work and is also making stuff that doesn't move people as much, then you should not go down that road anymore.
Yeah. It's really story first, isn't it? And, over, sort of content that's irrelevant in some ways. The story has to move people as well as a visual narrative.
Yeah. And you have to respect people's time nowadays. Like people are very busy. The attention is scarce.
Yeah.
Get in, get out.
Yeah.
Don't overstay your welcome. Don't expect people to watch a 2-hour thing that that could have been expressed in like 5 minutes.
Yeah. So have you done features?
Well, the Imposter Syndrome started as a feature film.
Right.
And then what I found was after having public screenings and submitting it to festivals that like the attention span is just not there.
Right.
For the kind of film that I was trying to make. I wanted to make something similar to a Kurt Vonnegut novel.
Right.
That kind of blend of theater of the absurd, looking at modern times and technology from the lens of like, we're all these crazy monkeys that have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And I just found that like I was getting a lot of friends that were saying like, "Oh, I'm in the middle of your movie. I've watched 20 minutes the last like 4 days, and I'm gonna watch the second half like probably by the." And I was like, oh, "Okay, the medium, the delivery mechanism here is flawed."
Yeah.
So what I found was people liked it a lot better if I divided it up episodically, and then you could watch it like a TV show.
Yeah.
And then I applied it to myself, and I'm like, well, how do I watch stuff? I almost never watch movies anymore. Like it's all TV shows. And one thing that's practical about that is like if you're a working dad or whatever,
Yeah.
you've got about 40 minutes between when you put your child to bed, eat dinner, and go to bed yourself.
Yeah.
So that like kind of television chunk, that 40 minutes of drama is like the perfect attention span length, I think now.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see more filmmakers actually divide their movies up into like three episodes and release it that way as miniseries.
So now you don't think that that's having a detrimental effect on people's attention span, do you? In the sense that I found that most people I know of a certain age that were brought up in a certain period are definitely informed by things like graphic novels.
Yeah.
And you sometimes see it in the pacing and actually even the visuals. I find myself, if I'm not hooked on a storyline, especially with new shows like HBO stuff and that kind of thing, immediately I'm not really into it. And I find sometimes the story is too complex sometimes. And I'm wondering if that plays into what you're talking about as well, that people don't really have the time to get into the complexities. If you want to do that, then read a graphic novel or a book. Is that sort of what you're thinking is as well?
I think it goes back to what I was saying about they don't have an attention for stuff that's wasting their time in like delivering the emotional impact.
Yeah.
I think that if you're bringing the goods, like if it's something amazing, then people will stick around for the 2 hours and experience it.
Right.
But for most of us who are just kind of, learning our way through artwork and getting better as the years go by,
Yeah.
you have to have more respect for the audience than we used to, because people aren't bored anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It used to be that you could watch television for 8 hours a day because there's just nothing going on,
Yeah.
But now there's a million little electronic gadgets, and video games are just so amazing for young people that like it's a hard thing to compete against. Also,
You have obviously done work for other people. Is your work dictated by who you're working for at the time, or your interpretation that's more important?
It always comes from the song track, right? Like you'll have a client come to you and they'll send you the track, and you meditate on it for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And you just see where your imagination takes you.
Right.
Lately, I've been kind of dipping into like people's previous work.
Yeah.
Just to see like what the original interpretation, their interpretation of those sounds is. You get a feeling for what their taste is.
Right.
And that I didn't used to do that, but I do that now just because there are fans of that band that are going to expect and associate that work with like certain worlds and certain moods. And you don't want to do something that is sacrilege to them, Sometimes there'll be a band or a song where you have what ends up being like an ironic interpretation of the stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're being faithful to the spirit of the music, I think. And sometimes dipping into their previous work will let you know if, a band like Tool, for instance, right? On first blush, you're like, this is really heavy in terms of like not only sound, but also the lyrics and things are dark and heavy.
Right.
But then you get to know the band, and the fans of the band know that it's a joke. Like Maynard is a jokester, right? Like the stuff is meant to be tongue in cheek a lot of the time. And so that'll inform like the type of visuals that you would pitch to that band if you were making a video for them.
And and that's what I was going to say. Like you pitch them towards a certain style, but you also, are cognizant and conscious of that there is an essence to their style as well.
Yeah.
And that you have to find that happy medium. I guess that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. There was a time in the early 2000s where I had a rep, and they were getting a lot of good commissions and sending them my way to have treatments written. And I didn't understand this aspect of the business. Like I was kind of thinking of myself as like my duty was to reinterpret this stuff and like make a cool video regardless of like what the artist's intent would be.
Yeah.
And I got into a lot of trouble like in that area just because I would just be open to like writing on any band, even if I wasn't interested in it. And
Yeah.
that would lead me to doing things, inappropriate things. Like I remember Busta Rhymes was doing a comeback album, and I was writing a treatment for it. And I remember all of the Michael Jackson allegations and stuff were going on at the time.
Right.
And I was like, oh, it would be fun to do like a crazy Busta Rhymes video like he used to do in the 90s. But like he's like a super cop, and he's like busting Michael Jackson's mansion and things. And this is like me coming as like a white dude that has like no idea that like Michael Jackson is a hero to the black community, and it's like a tragedy that anytime one of these black celebrities has any kind of like personal problems, like it's a real big knock on like the whole culture. And so I felt like embarrassed about that when I got older and kind of like understood more about appropriateness when it comes to writing.
Yeah, and I guess you have to be cognizant these days to a large degree of cultural iconography and that kind of thing that you're not.
Yeah, it just staying like just reminding myself to stay in my lane, you know, like there are jokes and stuff that are really only funny because we don't fully understand the topic.
Yeah.
And I think that is like part of the big reason why a lot of people get in trouble on Twitter and stuff. Is like, why are you talking about something that you know nothing about? You know, you can't even you can't even begin to make a smart point, let alone a funny point, if you don't know the topic well enough to be able to speak on it.
How do you? That's an interesting point, because you sort of they always say you should just your subject matter should be about what's around you and what you know.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you expand as a filmmaker or any creative artist if you're not sort of exploring other people's or other realities without, sort of, as you said, stepping on toes?
Right. Well, Werner Herzog would recommend that you just do more with your own life, right? Like, Werner Herzog's film school is, go get a job at a slaughterhouse, go get a job at a mental asylum, save up a bunch of money to buy a camera and then make a film, or read novels if you're in some far-flung place where you don't have a lot of those insane jobs that you can take. I would say that my main criticism of a lot of directors, I'm critical of a lot of directors nowadays where you can tell that they haven't followed that advice.
Right.
They know films based on other films that they've seen, and they're making their films based on other films they've seen, like really derivative.
Yeah.
You can tell that they haven't had their own experiences that are informing the writing.
Or they don't actually understand the film narrative, and they just sort of go kind of copying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like you'll be a fan of Quentin Tarantino in high school, and then your dream is to make Quentin Tarantino movies, and you don't realize that like, oh, Quentin Tarantino is based on like Godard and Grindhouse stuff. You don't see like the original influences that trickled down and translated into that thing.
Yeah.
So your work ends up being a copy of a copy. And it just doesn't have like the sting to it, right? Like that kind of punk sting that comes from having a lived experience or diving deep and finding the work of like a real artist, like somebody is a borderline crazy person, and being able to be interpret that in a more mainstream kind of way usually leads to better work.
I was going to say that over the years, I've seen films by directors, and you're looking at the film and you're going, wait a minute, is this like a Scorsese film?
Mm-hmm.
And you realize it's not, right? Or it's, and even Tarantino was sort of guilty of that to some degree. I mean, he was very unique, but there was definitely styles that informed his style. Mm-hmm. And I do find myself seeing that more and more. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that you really need to experience life to be able to make a statement or to put your point forward, whatever it is, whether it's a visual narrative or an artistic narrative. You definitely need to be informed about it.
Yeah, 100%. And also that's just a better way to live too, Like there are artists who are struggling and struggling with inspiration and things, and you say like, well, what have you been up to? And you're just like, well, I just, I listened to this album and I watched this TV show. You're like, well, just leave the house, man, go have fun, and the work will come like once you follow your bliss.
Yeah. Have you discovered a sort of running theme in your work, consciously or otherwise?
Well, I think that, going back to your artwork being derived from your lived experience, I think that one theme that comes up a lot in my work is the idea of the eccentric artist building artwork that is primarily for them, like an audience of one, and being confident about that.
Right.
I think that theme has repeated a bunch of times, and also the idea of artwork being kind of like a vessel you send out, like almost like the Voyager probe. You build these little pieces of art and then you send them out into the world, and you hope that they'll be discovered by, other civilizations and stuff to make contact.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of characters in my work that are working on things and eccentric in that way.
Yeah. And you've never really consciously thought about what's informing that? Like, is it a psychological thing? Is it a memory of something that you have? I find myself, for instance, always kind of creating the same thing until I finished with it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Do you find yourself doing that as well? Is there something that you're trying to get out, that you're trying to project from yourself?
I don't spend a whole lot of time psychoanalyzing why I do things.
Yeah.
I know that I'm a reflection of the world that I'm in.
Right.
When I'm kind of walking around the street with my wife or with one of my friends, I'm always the person that's like noticing stuff where I go like, oh, that person is walking with a limp, or that store closed down from last time.
Right.
And I find sometimes my friends will like come out of a daydream and they'll say that they were thinking about, how they're worried about going to the dentist or something.
Yeah.
I find that my experience of life is very much, again, influenced by my time watching television, where I'm kind of the observer that's moving through the world and interpreting what I see, as opposed to thinking myself as the protagonist in my story.
Right.
I've had debates with my friends where they talk about like how it's impossible for a human to not like see themselves as the protagonist in their own story, and like everyone sees themselves as like the center of the world, and there's no real villains. Everybody thinks that they're doing the right thing, and I'm like, I don't perceive my life that way. I don't see myself as being the center of attention in a lot of scenarios I'm in. There's just complete. Sometimes I'm walking around or reading the news or something, and there's just complete absurdity going on out in the world, and I don't have any control over it.
So you're sort of an amalgamation of what you see around you then.
Yeah.
And as you say, sometimes the absurdity of it all, or just you find yourself looking for the humor in things. You don't really.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So you don't have a tendency to kind of look for the darker things. Is that would you put it that way?
Oh, I'm judgmental as hell, and I see the dark side of stuff, but there's always humor in the darkness.
Yeah.
And I think most novelists and filmmakers, the work that resonates with me is the same way, right? Like you'll watch a David Lynch film and you'll see something that's both like horrifying and funny. Or you'll read, a great novel like Slaughterhouse-Five is both funny and horrifying. And that gallows humor, I think, is going to be a very important survival mechanism going forward as like the climate crisis kind of picks up. Is we have to be able to just, say to our kids, you know what, the world is being destroyed, but you can still have friends, you can still drink wine, you can still listen to music. You gotta put on you gotta see the silver lining, or like, at least try to enjoy your life, even though there are a lot of like problems.
Now, you're talking about directors. Are there any directors that you really are sort of not influenced by, but really are drawn to?
I guess I could probably describe it as like when I came out of school, we were really excited about Julian Schnabel's Basket film.
Right.
I loved the idea of a movie about other artists who were making things. I thought that was like it was inspiring in the same way that like a superhero movie like Indiana Jones was when I was a little kid.
Right.
That there's these people who are living alternative lifestyles and being rewarded for it. Like there's an opportunity that you can get wealthy, like making these little art projects.
Yeah.
But particularly that movie that Julian Schnabel made, also the structure of it, like the mixed media. There's a shot in it where Basket looks up at the New York skyline and there's like old surfer footage like above the buildings.
Right.
And I remember being like fascinated by that and wanting to know how technically that was put together.
Yeah.
The follow-up, Julian Schnabel's Diving Bell and the Butterfly,
Okay.
I thought was also an extraordinary kind of thing where you could see his background as a painter informing the visuals that he was making. It was a very painterly film.
Right.
And yeah, I would say that those are two large influences. I would say when it comes to like animation and things, most of the aesthetic that I do comes from my approach.
Right.
Having the humble beginnings of trying to make moving visuals using whatever I had around the house, like a little point and shoot Canon camera and photographs and the flowers in my yard and my roommates and things.
Yeah.
You got an aesthetic that just came from the limited resources that you had.
Right.
And it extends to now where I almost, not only has it become a habit to use those things, I'm also quite proud of the fact that the visuals that I make are quite low carbon, right? Like my film productions are not, they're not like requiring a ton of electricity and a ton of people and a ton of gasoline being burnt and stuff like that.
There's an economy to them.
There's an economy to it that I'm quite proud of. Like it, I much rather identify with, people like, fine art painters or somebody like Andy Warhol or something. That kind of lifestyle rather than somebody like Jim Cameron who they don't blink. You say like, oh, you need $200,000 to crash that truck. You're like, no problem. Here's the check. I always, whenever I get into scenarios like that where real money's being spent, I kind of like tense up and I go, oh, really? That's an awful lot of money to spend on a video. What, Jesus?
I know what you mean, because I've been on a few sets and I'm almost thinking to myself, good God, why are there so many people and so many things here?
Yeah, it's definitely held my career back. Like I'm envious of some of my colleagues who like shoot proper commercials and things, car commercials.
Yeah,
they're just much better at spending money than I am.
Yeah.
I have a real hard time. I almost need to like partner with a producer that's very good at it, and they'll just hide all that stuff from me. They're like, we're not going to talk about money. You're like, oh, okay, I can relax now.
It really struck me when if we were doing something, it was a location shoot, and they were laying down 60 feet of dolly track.
Mm-hmm.
And there were there were people everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept thinking to myself, good God, there must be a better way to do this. But maybe there isn't. Maybe it's just me, you know what I mean? But yeah, I do understand.
It's hard to get perfection. Like you can get 80% of the aesthetic on your own with like kind of meager grip equipment.
Yeah.
But if you want to get that 100% perfection, perfectly smooth, yada, 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 it takes like a team to be able to do it quickly. You can set it all up yourself or whatever, but it would take forever. You need that team to be able to set it up in an hour or whatever.
I mean, from a technical point of view, there's a lot of stuff now that's available. For instance, for a guy that's doing a sort of a much, much smaller production. Say, for instance, if you are using a dolly, they have the Dana dolly now, and you can operate it yourself. You might need somebody else to put it together, but those kinds of things, are those the kind of things that you are looking at from a technical point of view, or do you make them yourself?
No, I've invested. I've invested in. I got a Steadicam, which I haven't used yet. There are some like if you follow enough like gadget heads on YouTube, you'll end up buying things that you don't need. There's
Yeah, yeah.
definitely things that I bought that I don't need. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I'm always kind of like watching Nab and stuff to like see what the new gadgets are and how they play. But I am I still try to apply that kind of like critical, risk averse mindset that I have,
Yeah.
because otherwise you get into gear addiction, right? Like there's so many filmmakers on YouTube that they had started YouTube because they wanted it to be a bridge towards doing real filmmaking. But then it just
Yeah.
becomes a cycle where you get the new gadget and then you need to do the new YouTube video to like
Yeah.
get some money for like the next gadget. And suddenly like 10 years have passed and that's all they do is like
Yeah. They're doing
they
reviews.
just review stuff all night, all day
Yeah.
instead of making art.
Yeah. Are you one of those people that really tries to do it yourself? You know, you're not going to pay like $1,000 for a scrim or something like that. Do you find yourself making those things yourself?
I used to, but that's what I was saying about like the investment in the gear the last like 5 or 6 years has been realizing that you get a marginal increase in the quality of your work when you eliminate things like the wiggly screw, the wiggly handle on your camera. These things, they erode you only have like a certain amount of like mental tolerance and focus in a given day. And once you become like a dad and once you have responsibilities and things, you've got kind of a 6 or 7 hour block during the day to make your films. And if you want to boost the quality of that stuff, I think you have to laser focus in on the things that are a problem in your workflow, where you go like, this monitor cuts out 3 times a day. And in my old life, when I had nothing but time, that was fine and tolerable.
Right.
But now I don't have any time, so we're getting rid of that monitor. And we're gonna buy the good screws that don't come out, and we're gonna fix that handle on the camera so it's not wiggling during the shot. All little things to make sure that you don't have to do stuff over.
Yeah. And so what's your advice to say somebody who's getting into it? Like say somebody like you when they were first starting out in terms of that, what do you think they should concentrate?
The grip gear and the lighting is the cheapest part of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Like you can buy a whole grip package for $1,000.
Yeah.
You know, you can get the good clamps and things, and they last forever. They don't break.
Yeah.
A lot of the times they don't break. These heavy prosumer stuff from Impact and stuff are good quality things. You only have to buy them once.
Right.
So after your third project, when you know you're going to be making more of this, like get the good grip gear and hang on to it, because it'll allow you to be more productive, because there's nothing worse than like doing an elaborate shot and then realizing, oh, we bumped the camera and the stop motion is ruined, or you know, that light that you tried to save $100 on by not getting like the good quality version of it, it's flickering in the shot, and everything you shot the last 3 days has got like flicker lines through it. You know, like you're only able to overcome that stuff when you're in your 20s and time is just infinite. Like you can you're just like, we'll just redo it.
And that's pretty basic stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, your lighting and your audio, if that's an important part of your work too. Those are the things that really need to be taken care of, I guess. And you're right. A lot of the other stuff is kind of frivolous, like even to some extent. And I understand like steady cams and all that stuff, but I think now with some of the cameras with their stabilization, that's good enough. You know what I mean?
I think for the Steadicam, what I was imagining, I was just, I had a little bit of that gear addiction that I was describing. And I had this narrative in my head where I was thinking, well, if I got this piece of kit, that might open up a whole different world of like experimentation and a new way of working that I had never really tried before. I went down that avenue recently with anamorphic lenses. Like among like the film geeks, everybody's building their own like kind of DIY anamorphic rigs right now. And so I dipped my toe into that water, mostly because I didn't really understand like what the hype was all about. I bought like a $200 production or projection lens, and I rigged everything up, and I started seeing the images coming out of this and trying to figure out like what is the romance that people have and the association that they have with it. I
think it's a trend, isn't it?
It's a trend. It's a nostalgia thing. Like in order to get the kind of like flat visuals that you see in 1970s and 80s movies like Empire Strikes Back and stuff, you need that kind of like anamorphic long lens in order to get that kind of image feel. After playing with it, I soon started to see like the reasons why people like David Fincher and Ridley Scott, who was like the anamorphic king, doesn't use them anymore. Take this footage that you shot with your anamorphic lens and the computer can't interpret it. Like it just doesn't know what it's looking at. Like the distortions and things make it so that it's very difficult for the computer to track the footage and be able to do post-production on it for like image stabilization and things like that. So I think that it's a very great experiment for stills photographers, portrait photographers, anamorphic for a character piece where you have like a narrative drama where two people are in an apartment. The anamorphic lens would give that a much more romantic and interesting visuals for something like that. But if you're doing anything that requires post-production, if you're doing anything where you want to like key out the sky and put like different backgrounds in, any kind of like David Fincher kind of approach where you're doing seamless special effects, the anamorphic stuff is just a pain in the butt. Like it'll slow everything down and make your post-production life like much harder.
So it's the right tool for the right job as opposed to just using the tool for the sake of using it.
Yeah, like if you're doing music videos where you're just going to do a performance video with a band, then having anamorphic and a really unique kind of like lens combination is a great way to add some romance and stuff to that shot. But if you're doing kind of like, if you're trying to do seamless work and not have the lens get in the way, then those imperfections and stuff in anamorphic are just not fun. And I'm glad that we're talking about this too, because like I find that with some of the gear trends that happen, there's not enough time spent talking about appropriateness. Like people get like so hyped about like a new thing or a new aesthetic and all of the things that it's capable of that they overlook or they don't talk about the things like it doesn't work for this. Like if you're interested in this, then this isn't for you. Like don't follow along.
Well, there's a reason for why, cinematographers test and test and test for, sometimes 6 months, right? I mean, you've got to know your equipment before you can use it in many ways, and it also influences what you're doing as well. And you talked about revivalism. I'm kind of torn about this because revivalism always reminds me, it kind of smacks as if there's no creativity anymore. There's no sort of like yours. You're very creative, but there are less and less people that are willing to become creative and they tend to fall back on revivalism. Things from the past, like the obsession with the 70s or the 80s, that kind of thing. Right. From a historical standpoint, I understand it, but it seems more of a way of picking up on things that they can't do now. They want to look at that and to copy it, really. Do you think it's a sort of a bit of a symptom of something bigger?
I think that people have always been that way. There's a reason why, the Iliad was like the only popular story for thousands of years, You get to scratch your nostalgia itch. Yeah. You get the camaraderie of having, being able to speak to your friends and have them also identify and they've also seen the thing that you're excited about. Yeah. Sometimes it's quite lonely if you're into something really esoteric and you don't have, it's not shared. Yeah. Your friends don't also share that interest. Like it can be lonely having that hobby. Yeah. So I think it's always been there. I think that in terms of like what is the dominant focus of the culture, I think that the economics plays a big part in it. I think when you have massive gentrification happening in all of the world's like big cities, you make it more and more difficult for artists and eccentrics to just be able to daydream and come up with the new, and you end up forcing people into working jobs that they're not interested in, to the point where they're tired when they come home and they don't want something challenging to watch. They want the comforting thing that they know that's not going to waste their time or make them aggravated. And so they fall back on the stuff that they know. They're like, well, I've seen this 100 times, but it makes me happy, so I'm going to play it again.
So do you think that there should be a kind of a culture of supporting the arts? Like, for instance, say in the Netherlands or some places in Europe, they really subsidize artists, and artists are able to live fairly comfortable lives making their art. Do you think that in North America, art isn't taken as seriously? It's sort of one of those peripheral things that, yeah, that's very nice, but, can I use it to go to work in the morning? You know what I mean?
We're definitely artists are taken better care of in Canada compared to the Americans.
Yeah.
But I think that things are eroding a little bit. I think that stuff like the housing market crisis, the byproduct of that is going to be a lot less culture in Toronto.
Yeah.
And I think it's happening gradually enough that like people are not waking up to the fact that it's the culture that makes your life, it adds a lot of like beauty and meaning to your life to have artists around making culture. Toronto can become the Eaton Center if you let it. Like if you just let commercial forces take over everything. And you don't leave little pockets for bands to practice and for people to paint and things, then you're just going to have a monotony.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going back to what you were talking about. You have, bean counters that are backing stuff that's really formulaic and has no real, content. It's just a visual narrative with no story. I find that that's happening a lot as well.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And you'll see it. That's just a byproduct of the internet too, right? The internet is very good at measuring things. And so it makes sense that like a grant committee would start to look at the numbers and say like, well, the previous short that this artist did got 100,000 views on YouTube. So we should invest in more of that because we won't get in trouble. Like it's a popular kind of thing. But in the past, publishers took a great deal of pride in the idea that you had your two categories. You had your bestsellers that you had published in order to make the money. And then you have like your artists that you're supporting that has cultural value, even if it's not popular.
Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, and I've been around long enough in Toronto to know that, I've seen the changes. For instance, I used to hang out on Queen Street or King Street or just downtown in general. And I mean, there were Liberty Village, for instance, when you see what it was and what it is today, that exemplifies what you're talking about. It's full of, to some degree, wannabes or people that just never had any interest in understanding what it was to be a creative person living in Toronto and areas like that. I mean, I know that there are, cinemas, the people that are trying to put together spaces for artists to live in. I know that's, but it's not really nearly enough in comparison to all the corporate development that's going on.
Yeah, they like to use the term below market rates whenever they want to talk about. They don't want to actually say the actual prices because it's the market rates are just insane. Like being below the market rate is not anything to celebrate.
So, but okay, so as far as your style is concerned, and as far as the narrative of filmmaking, the filmmaking narrative, and all the influences it now has, how do you think it's going to evolve? Or what do you think it's going to evolve into, to the best of your knowledge or your opinion?
Well, for my own work, coming up next, we're working on a collaborative pilot for an animated television variety program. So imagine something like Robot Chicken, but like each of the variety show segments are done by a different animators, so that it would have a variety of different styles. I'm excited about that project, and I think it's timely in that you saw like a resurgence of Saturday Night Live during like the Andy Samberg type of era, where the individual segments of Saturday Night Live were very easily ported to YouTube. They work as like 2-minute segments. So I'd like to see more artists kind of approaching their work, more visual artists approach their work like hip hop artists, where you are releasing an album of like art, and the album is linked together by moods and themes, and there's cameos from different artists. The album has cameos from, this portrait painter and this photographer and, and all combining together into this amalgam, this album of content that a person who's looking for a certain like feeling can pick up, you know?
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like a mixed media kind of thing.
It would also be good in terms of learning the business side of it, like being influenced by like the successful business model of hip hop also, where you have maybe, you know, your screen printer has a big blow up year and they're super famous. They use that spotlight to bring up the next wave of new artists and do them a favor. And then when their career cools off, those young artists like pay back the favor and have them do a cameo on their set of work. I'd like to see more of that kind of like collaboration happen among like visual artists.
So like a cooperative in many ways. And I mean, I think in some ways that's the way around what we were talking about earlier, this sort of, you know, black hole cultural black hole that we're creating. And things like this can kind of help because these people can help each other in order to get their work out there, you know, together or individually, but they work together to try to get it done. Because I guess that's collaboration is really important these days because of that, right?
Oh, 100%. And then I'd also like to do more interactive work. I'm partnering with my friend Ilya Schwartz. We're in the early days of working on some game content.
Right.
I don't know if you follow indie games very closely, but that's become a great platform for illustrators and visual artists to express themselves and find new audiences.
Right.
Interactive is a great platform for visual art, especially with like the screens nowadays. Like 2D artwork looks absolutely astounding on like the iPad Pros or some of the new televisions.
Yeah. What do you think about the immersive VR and that kind of thing? You think that's just a sort of, well, not a fad, but do you think it's sort of, it will never really take the place of what you're seeing now, like the content, the way content is viewed now?
Well, I love games, and I think that part of the hype cycle that's going on now with the idea of the metaverse is just marketing. I think that Facebook is probably going to end up making something a bit like the Steam platform, where they introduce like some of the older Facebook users are currently not gamers, and they want to have like a seamless platform that will allow them to have the fun that like people younger than them have been doing for 40 years.
Yeah.
In terms of like VR, I'm excited about like augmented reality, but the VR headset I've always found like sweaty and awkward, and you need way too much space to use it, and the games have not been fun, in my opinion. I have much better experience playing things like Horizon or Witcher 3 or something just on like a large computer monitor, because you don't have to have stuff on your face. And
and it's still sort of, it's isolating a bit too, I find.
Weirdly isolating, right? Like you can, that kind of feeling where you take the headset off and all of a sudden you feel like you're waking up from a dream. You go like, oh, wait a minute, the apartment was on fire this whole time and I didn't notice.
But do you think it's like a generational thing? Do you think people like, you know, in the future, well, VR is nothing. It's just, you know, I'm used to that kind of thing. Do you think it'll evolve?
No, I think that it's a bit like the cliche. Whenever anybody learns filmmaking, one of the first ideas they have is like, okay, so we're going to have a shot and the person opens a book and then the book starts to animate in front of them.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's an idea that like comes back, or it's just like an obvious idea that everybody has when they see the technology.
Yeah.
I think that the same thing happens with VR, where people keep on wanting this periphery where they go like, okay, well, games are immersive, but imagine if like you could go inside the game and like you could feel it on your skin and stuff like that. I think what it's ignorant of is like how immersive like a novel is, you know, like if your mind is focused and your imagination is working, you don't need to like fill in all the blanks. Like your brain does a lot of the work for you. You don't need like the machine to do everything. And in fact, because the fidelity of the machine is limited, like if you have haptic feedback or whatever, like a rumble pack inside your controller, it can give you like a little bit of stimulus, but you're never going to like mistake that for like actually touching a real thing in the real world. It's always going to be a low fidelity experience. The impactful things I think are going to come from approaching a game the same way that a great novel approaches it. You just do really visceral visuals and audio experiences and allow people's brains to like pull them into the thing. You don't need to try to rebuild whole worlds, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think that, and again, it comes down to as we mentioned earlier on, we were talking about devices, not just mechanical devices, but there are devices that are being used to sort of hide the fact that there's no bloody story, and it still comes down to having a great story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many people just don't get that part of it, or they do, but they don't think about it as much.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there any, and I don't like using the phrase vanity projects, but is there anything that you really are dying to do? Is that you sort of have your, Kubrick's Napoleon masterpiece that you want to make? Is there something that you really want to do?
No, I don't really think in those terms, but because I'm a tinkerer and because like I generally take on projects because I'm curious about exploring a different like medium or whatever. The idea of doing a game is kind of foremost on my mind right now, and exploring kind of like the possibilities and like the fun of interactive, the surprising learning curve and stuff I'm excited about. One of the disappointments about like growing up and becoming an adult is I felt a little bit disappointed that the magic doors that you see happen and appear all the time in movies, they don't really exist. The idea of like coming across that undiscovered part of the jungle and pulling back the reeds and like there's dinosaurs that have never been discovered. That kind of idea of like undiscovered places in the world, I think it's a shame that you grow up and you kind of realize that like everything has been found.
Yeah.
So one of the exciting things about the idea of a metaverse or like interactive or AR is it would be fun to build some interactive places or little bits of like magic psychedelia that you could hide in the real world for people who are curious and explorers to find. And it's not something that's marketed, but like you walk down that alleyway in Toronto, and then if you look into the sewer pipe or whatever with your phone, there's a little character kind of hiding in there, and he's got a bit of wisdom for you. Like that kind of D&D type of fun, I think would be great to add to the real world as like a digital layer.
And I think you're sort of speaking to this idea that we've lost the sense of awe in many ways, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so. That kind of like classic heroic awe.
Yeah.
That there are dragons to slay and that there are dungeons to explore, is kind of being the only way you can find that is in games now. Like there's not a whole lot of that left in like the real world. So I think that it would be fun to explore interactive from that point of view and try to see if we can make the digital D&D stuff like kind of bleed into the real world.
Yeah. Well, look, I have to say I'm really impressed with your work, Jesse. It's very innovative, very refreshing in many ways. Because it did manage to, what I could see right away is it managed to create, it wasn't just the typical visual narrative. It had real depth to it, and it was very creative in how it evolved. You definitely like to see things evolve, don't you?
Oh, 100%. One of my favorite lines from Charlie Kaufman's adaptation was when the Kaufman brothers are in one of the final sequences, they're trying to figure out what's wrong with Charlie's screenplay. And he mentions a passage from Susan Orlean's book where she talks about a paper ball that was thrown into water. And as the water absorbed into the paper ball, it blossomed and turned into a flower. What was once a mundane kind of piece of throwaway was given new life by the attention of an artist. And I think that is, if I want, I like that idea for a theme in my work. I like the idea of creating new and beautiful things from what would have been an ordinary piece of trash. I think is a very exciting and noble kind of experiment.
That's great. Well, listen, Jesse, on that note, thank you very much for joining me today. Very interesting. Again, now let's get into where people can find your work and that kind of thing. Where can they go to see your work?
Almost everything I've ever done is at jesseyules.com.
Okay, jesseyules.com.
Yeah, super easy to find.
Yeah. And do you have stuff on YouTube and Vimeo and stuff?
Oh, I did, but it's all gotten convoluted now. Like YouTube and Google had new algorithms that came out that really tried to clamp down on anything you didn't have the rights to.
Right.
And so there'd be even official music videos that I had posted that I had been commissioned to do that got like copyright flagged and pulled off. Yeah. So I've kind of like abandoned trying to like keep up with YouTube, and I just do everything on Vimeo now.
Good. I mean, and you're doing it through your own portal in many ways. You've sort of created your own portal for your work.
Yeah, 100%. I miss the old days where there used to be word of mouth where you would say like, oh, I was on this great website the other day. You should check it out. Like that doesn't happen as much anymore. Everybody is kind of like relying on Twitter and Facebook to try to recommend things to them.
Yeah. Sort of restricting the ways that we can consume the imagery and that kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, listen, Jesse, thank you very much once again for talking with me on this episode. Great luck. I hope things really take off and start to move forward. Your CV is very impressive, I must say. You've done a lot of work and continued success.
Thank you very much. Everybody in Toronto today, get out and enjoy the sunshine. It's a lovely day.
It is.
Call up a friend that you haven't talked to in a while.
Yep.
Call your mom. Drink a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Get off the internet for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm going to do after I finish here. But listen, thanks once again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir. See you later. Bye.
That was my conversation with talented filmmaker Jesse Yules about his life as a filmmaker. I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Channel F. I'll see you the next time. The previous episode was produced and edited by Fajr Sheriff. Assistant editor Lori H. Technical supervisor Lori H. Music provided with the kind permission of Psychic Weapons. Their new release can be found at psychicweapons.bandcamp.com. And all visuals provided with kind permission from Jesse Yules. Jesse Yules' fabulous works can be found at vimeo.com/Jesse Yules and on his website, jesseyules.com. This is a Channel F production. Listening to Channel